much of Peru's history since its independence, the political infrastructure during the era of the Shining Path was mostly unstable. It had been bouncing from elections to coups with no clear direction as to where it was headed next. The mastermind of the Shining Path movement, Abimel Guzman Reynoso, branched off from the Peruvian Communist Party in the 1960s to head his own pro-Chinese faction, the Shining Path. The president during that time was Fernando Belaunde Terry, who was elected democratically. Although he initiated several developmental projects, he, no different from past political leaders of Peru, largely ignored the lower classes among the Andean highlands, instead focusing on urban centers like Lima. Thus, the conditions of the peasants did not change much until a military regime took control, overthrowing Belaunde. The coup was led by General Francisco Velasco Alvarado. Velasco initiated left-leaning reforms with the intention of bringing justice to the poor. However, his reforms failed in producing real change and in reality did more harm than good, specifically with the expropriation of haciendas and implementation of large state-controlled cooperatives. The peasants felt even more deprived of their right to land, and social tensions mounted even further. Guzman took complete advantage of this vulnerable situation by playing on the strong, frustrated anti-government feelings of the peasants. He lured them in with the promise of a return to pre-Incan ideals of indigenous control and shared land. The government indifference toward the Andes countryside led to Guzman's ability to turn areas like Ayacucho into Shining Path strongholds. What made this movement particularly unique, though, was not the political climate of the time. Rather, it was the powerful ideology of Guzman that single-handedly brought the movement from the Andes highlands to the national forefront. Guzman saw an opportunity to advance his goals and did whatever it took to accomplish those goals, emphasizing violence and extensive brainwashing as a means. Unlike other rebellion movements, the conditions were not the impetus of the Shining Path. The conditions allowed Guzman to recruit peasants, but the real impetus was Guzman himself and his unwavering beliefs in Maoist doctrine.
Guzman began developing his ideology in 1959 when San Cristobal de Huamanga University in Ayacucho reopened after the area had suffered from poor infrastructure and a lack of economic mobility and political influence. For the next 10 years, university served as a safe haven for Guzman and other professors who belonged to the Peruvian Communist Party and adopted the militant Maoist doctrine. Together, they founded the Shining Path ideology and began expanding its membership. Between 1973 and 1975, Guzman's former students took over the student councils and began recruiting for more members in other universities. The Shining Path initially began its political work by launching the People's War in the Upper Huallaga Valley, known for its unique coca plantations. On May 17, 1980, the eve of the first democratic election in 12 years, Shining Path's political rebellions were brought to light. The Shining Path burned ballot boxes and began an armed struggle to launch a war against the Peruvian government. Since then, the Shining Path engaged in many violent attacks, threatening native Peruvians. On April 3, 1983, the Shining Path murdered 69 villagers with machetes for resisting in guerrilla activities. Guzman made it loud and clear: anyone who resists the forces of the people will face execution. In fact, Guzman established labor camps where the imprisoned were forced to work in coca plants in dire conditions. In April 14, 1985, the Shining Path reacted violently against the victory of Alan Garcia in the presidential elections. The Shining Path expressed their anger against Garcia's reformist political views by killing thousands of inhabitants, which became known as the Peruvian Prison Massacre.
Similar to the extreme leftist and powerful anthem, Lento Nacional, the Canto de Batalla, the battle song, and Brilla el Nuevo Poder, Shine, the new power, capture the extent to which the Shining Path took global, universal communism to heart. They contain a stark contrast in which the lyrics are supposed to be emancipatory to proletarians everywhere, but ultimately turn these masses into the army of one man. This reality inevitably lends itself to the reckless and ruthless use of force. addition, the Shining Path regard women as half of heaven, and usually designate them with vital positions in the party's hierarchy. This shows the pride women entailed in the movement, what they called Movimiento Femenino.
In September of 1992, Guzman was captured by the Peruvian police. The Peruvian police in the Circuito district of Lima were monitoring an apartment above a dance studio in which they suspected Shining Path leaders to visit frequently. What led police to confirm of Guzman's presence above the dance studio was the fact that they found medication for psoriasis in the garbage cans outside the apartment. Psoriasis was a disease that Guzman was known to have and the backbone to his capture. The raid that captured Guzman not only led police to a man they have been looking for quite a while, but the beginning to the fall of leadership in the Shining Path. Guzman was displayed publicly in order to lessen the fear of the entire nation of Peru. Peru's government, though unvalued by the majority, displayed Guzman as an exhibit to try and renew faith in the people. Faith in the sense they feel like because they've captured this guerrilla leader, the Peruvian government can now lead the country to a better future.
Feliciano, ¿pensaste que llegaría este momento?
The presence of the Shining Path in Peru, however, did not subside. Guzman's role as the leader of the Shining Path was taken over by Oscar Ramirez, a man that later attempted a resurgence of the movement. In 1994, some 6,000 members of the Shining Path surrendered. Ramirez had failed in his inability to resurge the movement to what it was under Guzman. Ramirez was captured by police and sentenced for 24 years in prison for his involvement in the internal conflict in Peru and Shining Path activities. After Ramirez's capture, the group disintegrated, guerrilla activity dropped severely, and peace slowly began to return to the areas of Peru where the Shining Path were especially active.
One recent insurgency influenced by the Shining Path is the Maoist insurgency in Nepal. Calling itself the Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoist rebels fashioned themselves as carriers of the Shining Path's mission of worldwide communist revolution. The insurgency peaked as a 10-year civil war between the Maoist and the Nepali monarchy from 1996 to 2006. The comparisons are many. According to an article in the Nepali Times, the Maoists themselves made references to the Shining Path, but general observers of the situation in Nepal also noticed broader similarities between Nepal and Peru's political, social, economic, and geographical context. Nepal, like Peru, is a mountainous country, a characteristic which lends itself to the development of a varied population. In Peru, there were the various indigenous peoples that made up much of the population of the non-urban areas of the country. A similar situation was present in Nepal, but the comparisons are more than just physical. Locke identifies Nepal as similar to Peru in that it is a country at the fringes of the modern world with huge inequalities among ethnicities, economic classes, and locations. In the context of extreme inequalities and the two countries' status as forgotten lands surrounded by more successful countries, Locke identifies Kathmandu as the Lima of Nepal, a vast black hole of corruption, cynicism, and coercive power that both preys upon and ignores a troubled hinterland. From this comparison, it's easy to see how the Maoist rebel organizations could have formed and spread along similar lines. If the country's landscapes were similar, and if social and economic inequalities functioned in basically the same way in both countries, it seems easy to imagine that Nepali Maoists would draw on the same techniques and messages to subvert their government.